New Orleans. This city I feel like I know every alley, every brick. I'm Clara. I've lived here for years, walking these narrow streets of the French Quarter, listening to its whispers. I've heard so many stories here. Some of joy, some of sorrow, and some that just stay tucked away in the heart until they decide to wake up. Today I want to tell you one that's close to my own heart. Sit down, get comfortable. I'll tell it slowly, the way old stories should be told. On Frenchmen Street, where live music drifts through the air at night and the scent of old brick lingers during the day, there's a small, almost hidden bookstore. Its name is Harlan's Whispering Pages. The door is old wood, worn smooth by countless hands, and above it hangs a small brass bell. Whenever someone steps inside, the bell gives a soft lullaby-like chime, like an old voice saying, "Come in, stay a while." Inside, time feels paused. The walls are lined with bookshelves that reach all the way to the ceiling. They're made of old oak, scarred with years of fingerprints and dust. The floor is covered in faded Persian rugs, and the air carries that unmistakable smell of aged paper, mixed with just a hint of leather and vanilla, as if some long-ago memory has just stirred awake. The owner is Thomas Harlan. Everyone calls him Mr. Harlan. He's 68, hair completely white now but still thick and gently wavy. His eyes are blue, like the Gulf of Mexico when the morning sun hits the water. A short, neat beard frames his face, and he always wears the same soft smile, one that says without words, "You're safe here." Every morning at 10 he opens the shop. First the door, then he goes behind the counter, lights a small stove and brews chicory-blended black coffee, the real New Orleans kind, bitter and sweet at the same time. Then he settles into his favorite chair, an old rocking chair that once belonged to his grandfather. The wood is cracked in places, but it still rocks gently and feels like home. From there he looks out the window. Tourists snapping photos, a street musician strumming a guitar, a little girl holding her father's hand as they walk past. Mr. Harlan's life is a lot like that view. Slow, quiet, but full of things hidden beneath the surface. He never raises his voice. When a customer walks in, he just stands, smiles, and says in his slow southern drawl, "Good morning. Looking for anything special today?" The words stretch out warm and easy the way people talk down here. Folks like him because he never rushes anyone. If someone is searching for a book, he'll walk over to the shelves himself, run his finger along the spines, flip a few pages and quietly say, "Try this one. It'll speak to you." I know his younger days were spent in the heart of this city's wild energy. Back in the 1970s, when Bourbon Street still pulsed with true jazz nights, he was a young man playing drums in the clubs. His hands were fast, his rhythm sure. And in his heart there was room for a girl named Emma. Emma was an artist. She used to sit near Jackson Square with her easel, painting the light on the iron balconies. Long curly hair, green eyes. At night they'd sit by the Mississippi River, watching the stars, talking. Emma would say, "Thomas, listen, the river's always saying something." And Harlan would laugh. "It's just water, Emma." But she'd smile and reply, "No, it's whispering." One day they argued. Nothing huge, just a misunderstanding. Emma said he was too quiet. Harlan answered, "That's just how I am." She left, headed to San Francisco to open her own art gallery. Harlan didn't try to stop her. He stayed silent the way he always had. Now years later he regrets that silence. At night, when the shop is closed and he climbs the narrow stairs to his small apartment right above the store, he thinks, "I wish I'd spoken. I wish I'd told her she was everything to me." But life moved on. He opened the bookstore, collected books, and made silence his companion. One afternoon, as the sun was sinking and golden light spilled across the shelves, Mr. Harlan opened an old cabinet in the back. The lock was rusted. Inside, buried under layers of dust, was a book. The cover was deep red leather, the title stamped in faded gold. Echoes of Forgotten Whispers. He lifted it gently. The moment he opened the pages, a soft breeze moved through the room, like the book itself was breathing. The first page was blank, but on page 23, written in old ink by hand, were these words: "The most beautiful whispers of life hide in the moments we forget. Listen when they come back to you." His fingers froze. His heartbeat quickened. That handwriting, could it be Emma's? No, impossible. But the words carried him straight back to those nights by the river. He closed the book, sat down in his rocking chair, and thought, "This book is speaking to me." And that's where the story really begins. The next morning the rain had moved on, leaving New Orleans wrapped in that soft, silvery light that follows a storm. The streets glistened and the air smelled clean, wet brick, distant coffee, and the faint salt of the river. I remember it clearly because that was the day the bell rang a little differently. Not louder, just expectant, like it knew someone important was stepping through the door. Mr. Harlan had already opened the shop. He'd swept the rug, dusted the front shelves, brewed his chicory coffee, and was back in the rocking chair with the red book resting on his knee. He hadn't read much more since yesterday. Something about it felt heavy, not in a bad way, but like it was waiting for the right moment. He kept glancing at the cover, tracing the gold letters with his thumb, wondering if he should open it again or let it rest. Around 11:30 the bell chimed. In walked a young man, maybe 22-23. Tall, slim, dark hair a little too long and falling into his eyes. He wore a faded gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. His shoulders were hunched, hands deep in his pockets, the way people walk when they're carrying something invisible but heavy. He paused just inside the door, letting his eyes adjust to the dimmer light, then looked around like he wasn't sure why he'd come in. Mr. Harlan watched him without staring. He'd seen that look before. Young folks who wander and not looking for a specific book, but for something they can't name. He set the red book carefully on the small side table and stood up slowly. "Good morning," he said, voice low and easy. "Take your time. No rush here." The young man nodded, barely. "Thanks," he mumbled. His voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the shop's hush. He moved down the first aisle, fingers brushing spines without really touching them. Fiction, poetry, old travelogues, nothing seemed to hold him. After a few minutes he turned back toward the counter, hesitated, then spoke. "Do you have anything that's, quiet?" Mr. Harlan tilted his head. "Quiet? Yeah. Like something that doesn't demand anything. Just sits there." "I don't know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not really in the mood to read anything loud right now." Mr. Harlan studied him for a long moment. The boy's name, he would learn later, was Alex Reed. A senior at Tulane, studying literature but lately feeling like the words on every page were shouting at him. A breakup 2 weeks earlier had left him hollow. His girlfriend, Sophie, had said the same thing Emma once said to Harlan. "You're too quiet, Alex. I can't hear what you're thinking." Then she was gone. Since then he'd been avoiding conversations, avoiding music, avoiding almost everything that made noise. He'd walked into the shop because it looked like the quietest place on Frenchmen Street. Mr. Harlan didn't answer right away. Instead he walked to the back shelf, the one he rarely let customers browse without guidance. He reached up, pulled down the red leather book and carried it back. "This one," he said simply, holding it out. Alex looked at it. "It's pretty old." "It is. But old doesn't mean loud." Alex took the book carefully like it might break. He opened to a random page. His eyes moved over the lines, then stopped. He read aloud, almost to himself. Silence is not emptiness. It is the space where whispers gather and wait. He looked up at Mr. Harlan. Who wrote that? Someone who knew what silence feels like, Harlan answered. Someone who maybe stayed quiet too long. Alex swallowed. Can I sit here and read for a bit? Chair's right there, Harlan said, nodding toward the second rocking chair he kept in the corner for days like this. Coffee's on the warmer if you want some. No charge for sittin'. Alex sat. For the next hour the only sounds were the soft creak of the rocker, the occasional turn of a page, and the distant clatter of a horse-drawn carriage passing outside. Mr. Harlan returned to his own chair, picked up an old volume of poetry, but mostly he just watched the young man. At one point Alex paused on page 47. There was another handwritten note in the margin, faded but clear. Forgive the silence you kept. It was only protecting something fragile. Speak when you're ready, not before. Alex's shoulders began to shake. Not loudly, just small quiet tremors. He closed the book, pressed his palms to his eyes, and sat there breathing hard for a minute. Mr. Harlan didn't move, didn't speak. He knew some moments need space more than words. Eventually Alex wiped his face with his sleeve and looked over. This book, it's like it knows me. Mr. Harlan nodded slowly. Books have a way. Especially the ones that have been carried through other people's silences. Alex stood up. I think I need to take this home. How much? Mr. Harlan shook his head. It's not for sale. But you can borrow it. Bring it back when you're done listening. Alex stared at him. You don't even know me. I know what it feels like to wish you'd spoken sooner, Harlan said quietly. That's enough. Alex tucked the book under his arm. At the door he turned back. Thank you, Mr. Harlan. Thomas, the old man corrected gently. And you're welcome, son. The bell chimed as Alex stepped out into the silver light. Mr. Harlan watched him walk away down Frenchmen Street until he disappeared around the corner. Then he sat back down, picked up his coffee and smiled to himself. The first real unguarded smile he'd allowed in a long time. That book was moving again. And somehow it felt like it had been waiting for both of them. The days after Alex left with the book felt strangely still to Mr. Harlan. Frenchmen Street kept its rhythm, tourists laughing, musicians playing for tips, the occasional clop-clop of a mule-drawn carriage, but inside the shop, the air seemed to hold its breath. The red leather book was gone from the side table, and in its place was an empty space that somehow felt louder than any noise. Harlan didn't mind the quiet. He'd lived with it for decades, but now it carried a different weight. Every time the bell chimed, he looked up half expecting to see Alex returning the book early, or perhaps someone new who needed to borrow its whispers. A few regulars came in, old Mrs. Thibodeau looking for another romance novel, a college kid hunting for a beat-up copy of Kerouac, but no one asked about the red book and Harlan didn't mention it. Some things he knew find their way to people without being announced. Then came the storm. It rolled in late one afternoon in early October. The sky had been heavy all day, the kind of gray that presses down on your shoulders. By 4 o'clock the wind picked up, rattling the shop's old windows and sending dry leaves skittering across the sidewalk. Harlan stepped outside to bring in the small chalkboard sign that read, "Open, come sit a while." Thunder grumbled in the distance like an old man clearing his throat. He was just locking the door when the bell rang behind him. One sharp, urgent chime. He turned. Standing in the doorway, rain dripping from the brim of her wide hat, was a woman he hadn't seen in 43 years. Emma. She looked older, of course, lines around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before, hair more silver than the chestnut he remembered. But the way she held herself was the same. Shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, green eyes still bright enough to cut through any storm. She wore a long olive green coat, soaked at the hem, and carried a canvas tote bag that sagged with the weight of whatever was inside. For a long second neither of them spoke. The rain hammered the awning above the door. Thunder rolled closer. "Thomas," she said finally. Her voice was softer than he remembered, but steady. "Emma." His own voice cracked on the single word. He stepped aside. "Come in before you drown." She stepped inside. Water pooled around her boots on the rug. Harlan closed the door behind her, the bell giving one last soft note. The shop felt smaller suddenly, the shelves leaning in like they were listening. Emma took off her hat, shook it gently, and looked around. Her gaze moved slowly over the books, the rocking chairs, the faint glow of the lamp on the counter. "You really did it," she said. "A bookstore." "Had to do something with all the quiet," he answered. She gave a small sad smile. "You always were good at quiet." He didn't reply to that. Instead he gestured toward the back. "There's a small electric kettle in the alcove. Coffee? Or tea if you'd rather." "Coffee," she said. "Black. Like always." He nodded and went to make it. His hand shook a little as he poured the chicory brew into two mismatched mugs. One plain white, one with a faded fleur-de-lis pattern. When he came back, she had taken off her coat and hung it on the old brass stand by the door. She was standing near his rocking chair, looking down at the empty spot where the red book usually sat. "You still have that old chair," she said. "Still rocks the same," he replied, handing her the mug. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away too quickly. They sat, her in the second rocker, him in his usual one. The storm outside grew louder. Wind howling down the street, rain lashing the windows like it wanted in. Lightning flashed, turning the shop white for an instant. Then thunder shook the shelves. Emma sipped her coffee, then set the mug on the small table between them. "I didn't come to New Orleans for the storm," she said. "My daughter's getting married next month. She's marrying a local boy. Grew up in the Garden District. They wanted the ceremony here, in the quarter. I flew in early to help with arrangements, and maybe to see if anything felt the same." Harlan listened without interrupting. He'd learned long ago that some silences are invitations. "I walked past this street yesterday," she continued. "Saw the sign. Harlan's Whispering Pages. I almost didn't come in. Thought maybe you'd sold it or moved away or, I don't know. Forgotten." "I never forgot," he said quietly. She looked at him then, really looked. "Neither did I." Another flash of lightning. The lights flickered but stayed on. "I kept thinking about that last night," she said. "By the river. You said the water was just water. I said it was whispering. We were both right in a way. It was just water, but it carried every word we didn't say." Harlan stared into his mug. "I should have said more. Should have told you how much you meant. Instead I let the silence win." Emma reached over and touched the back of his hand. Just a light touch, fingers resting there for a heartbeat. "We both let it win," she said. "I left because I thought quiet meant you didn't care. Turns out quiet was just how you loved." He turned his hand over so their palms met. Her skin was cool from the rain but warm underneath. "I kept every painting you ever gave me," he said. "They're upstairs. Never took them down." She smiled. "A real one this time, small but bright. I kept the drumsticks you carved our initials into. They're in a box in my studio. Still can't play a note, but I never threw them away." Thunder rolled again, softer this time, moving away. Emma looked around the shop once more. "Do you ever get lonely here?" "Sometimes," he admitted. But books keep company. And lately one book in particular has been talking back. She raised an eyebrow. Oh. He told her about the red book, how he'd found it in the old cabinet, the handwritten notes, the way it seemed to know things it shouldn't. He told her about Alex, the boy who'd walked in looking for silence and left carrying something heavier and lighter at the same time. Emma listened, eyes wide. When he finished, she said, "That sounds like the kind of book that doesn't stay in one place long." "It doesn't," he agreed. "It's out there now, whispering to someone else." She leaned back in the chair, rocking gently. "Maybe it's time I borrowed something too." Harlan stood, walked to a shelf near the window, and pulled down a slim volume of poetry. Mary Oliver, a worn paperback he'd read 100 times. He handed it to her. "Start with this one," he said. "It's about paying attention to the small things. The whispers." Emma took it, opened to a random page and read aloud in a soft voice. "Instructions for living a life. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it." She closed the book and looked at him. "I think I forgot how to do that last part," she said. "Tell about it." Harlan sat back down. "We've got time." Outside, the rain eased to a steady patter. The storm was passing. Inside Harlan's whispering pages, two old silences were finally beginning to speak. The storm had passed by the following evening, leaving the French Quarter washed clean and glistening under streetlights. Puddles reflected the neon signs from the bars across the street, and the air felt lighter, as if the rain had carried away some of the city's usual heaviness. Inside Harlan's whispering pages, the shop was quiet except for the soft tick of an old wall clock and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. Mr. Harlan had kept the lights low, just the reading lamp on the counter and a small string of fairy lights he'd strung along the top shelf years ago, tiny warm dots that made the books look like they were glowing from within. He was sitting in his rocking chair, an untouched cup of coffee cooling beside him, when the bell chimed again. This time it was gentle, almost hesitant. Alex stepped in. He looked different, still the same hoodie, same sneakers, but his posture had changed. Shoulders straighter, eyes clearer. He carried the red book carefully in both hands, like it was something fragile and precious. Raindrops still clung to his hair, but he didn't seem to notice. "Evening, Thomas," Alex said. His voice was steadier than before. Harlan stood up slowly, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "Evening, Alex. Didn't expect you back so soon." "I wasn't planning to come tonight," Alex admitted. "But I finished it. Or maybe it finished with me. I don't know which." Harlan gestured to the second rocking chair. "Sit. Coffee's still warm." Alex sat. He set the book on the small table between them, open to the last page he'd read. For a minute neither spoke. The fairy lights flickered faintly, casting soft shadows across their faces. "I read it slow," Alex began. "One page at a time. Sometimes I'd stop and just stare at the wall for half an hour. The notes in the margins, they felt like they were written for me. Like someone had been watching my life and knew exactly what I needed to hear." He pointed to a line near the bottom of the page. "Silence can be a wall or a bridge. Choose the bridge when you're ready to cross." Alex looked up. That one hit hard. "Sophie, my ex, she said I built walls with my quiet. I thought I was protecting myself. Turns out I was just trapping myself inside." Harlan nodded. "Walls are easy. Bridges take courage." Alex leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I called her last night, after I read that page. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just knew I had to say something. Anything." Harlan waited, letting the silence do its work. "She answered on the third ring," Alex continued. "Her voice. God, it sounded tired. Like she'd been waiting for the phone to ring too. I told her I was sorry. Not just for being quiet, but for thinking my silence was strength. I told her I'd been afraid. Of saying the wrong thing, of looking weak, of losing her anyway. And she cried. Not loud, just quiet tears. She said she'd missed hearing my voice, even when it was only a few words. He paused, swallowing hard. We talked for 2 hours. About everything we'd been too scared to say before. She's coming over tomorrow. We're going to try again. Not like before, better. Slower. With more talking. Harlan's eyes softened. That's a bridge worth crossing, son. Alex picked up the book again, running his thumb along the spine. This book, it didn't just sit there. It pushed. Gently, but it pushed. Every note felt like a hand on my shoulder saying, "You're allowed to speak. You're allowed to be heard." He looked at Harlan. Where did it come from? Really? Harlan leaned back in his chair, rocking slowly. Found it in an old cabinet years ago. Dust thick as a blanket. No record of who left it. But the notes, they started appearing over time. Different handwriting, different years. Like people borrowed it, added their own whispers and passed it on. Alex opened to the inside cover. There in faint pencil was a date. 1927. Below it, for Elizabeth. May your silence find its voice again. Who's Elizabeth? Alex asked. Harlan shrugged. Don't know yet. But I'm starting to think this book chooses its readers. And when they're done listening, they leave something behind for the next one. Alex closed the book and slid it back across the table toward Harlan. I think I'm done listening, he said. For now. But I wrote something in the back. Hope that's okay. Harlan opened to the very last page. In neat, careful handwriting, Alex's were these words. Thank you for teaching me that silence can be love, but speaking it is braver. I'm crossing the bridge. Alex. Harlan read it twice, then looked up. His eyes were bright, not with tears exactly, but with something close. That's a good whisper to leave behind, he said quietly. Alex stood. I should get going. Early class tomorrow. But I'll come back. Maybe bring Sophie. She loves old books. Harlan walked him to the door. At the threshold, Alex turned. Thank you, Thomas, for the book. And for the quiet when I needed it. Harlan placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Thank you for bringing it back. It was waiting for you. The bell chimed as Alex stepped out into the damp night. Harlan watched him disappear down Frenchmen Street, then closed the door. He returned to his chair, picked up the red book, and opened it to Alex's note. For a long time he just sat there, rocking gently, letting the words settle. Outside, the city hummed on music, laughter, the low rumble of a passing streetcar. Inside the shop, something had shifted. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of bridges being built, one quiet word at a time. 2 days after the storm, the French Quarter woke to a rare clear morning. Sky a deep, endless blue, air crisp with the promise of autumn. The streets still held puddles here and there, reflecting the wrought iron balconies overhead like little broken mirrors. Harlan opened the shop a few minutes early. He felt restless, the way he used to feel before a big jazz set back in the 70s. Anticipation mixed with something softer, something he couldn't quite name. He swept the rug twice, straightened books that didn't need straightening, and finally sat in his rocking chair with a fresh mug of chicory coffee. The red book rested on the side table again, Alex's note still open on the last page. Harlan had read those words a dozen times since Alex left. Silence can be love, but speaking it is braver. Each time they settled a little deeper. Around noon the bell chimed. 2 quick notes this time, almost playful. Alex walked in, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a young woman, 21, maybe 22, petite, with shoulder-length auburn hair and a warm, curious smile. She wore a simple green sweater and carried a small canvas bag slung across her body. Her eyes went straight to the shelves, bright with that special kind of hunger book lovers recognize immediately. "Thomas," Alex said, grinning wider than Harlan had ever seen. "This is Sophie." Sophie stepped forward, extending her hand. "Hi, Mr. Harlan. Alex has told me, well, everything. About the shop. About the book. About you." Harlan stood, shook her hand gently. "Just Thomas is fine. Welcome, Sophie." She glanced at Alex, then back at Harlan. "Thank you for lending him that book. I think it saved us." Harlan waved a hand modestly. "Books don't save people. They just remind them what's worth saving." Sophie laughed softly, a light musical sound that made the shop feel warmer. "Either way, I owe it one." Alex pulled the red book from his bag and set it carefully on the counter. "We read the last pages together last night. Out loud. It felt right." Sophie nodded. "There's this one note near the end, faded pencil, almost hard to read. It says, 'The quietest love speaks the loudest when it finally finds words.'" We both cried a little. Then we talked until 3 in the morning. Real talk. Not the careful kind we used to do. Harlan looked at them both. They stood close, not touching but near enough that the space between them felt alive. He recognized that look. Two people who had almost lost each other and were now choosing very deliberately to stay. "Sit," he said. "Both of you. Coffee's fresh." They settled into the rocking chairs, Alex in the second one, Sophie perched on the edge of Harlan's old ottoman. Harlan poured 2 more mugs and handed them over. For a few minutes they just sat, rocking gently, sipping coffee, listening to the city outside. A saxophone warming up down the block, the low murmur of tourists, the occasional laugh from a passing group. Sophie broke the quiet first. "Alex told me about Emma," she said carefully. "How you two reconnected the other night." Harlan nodded slowly. "We did." "Is she coming back today?" Alex asked. "She said she might. She's helping her daughter with wedding plans. But she promised coffee this afternoon." Sophie smiled. "Then we'll wait a little. If that's okay." Harlan chuckled. "This shop's been waiting decades. A few more minutes won't hurt." They talked slowly at first, then easier. Sophie told Harlan about her senior thesis on forgotten women poets of the South. Alex talked about his fear of graduation, of not knowing what came next. Harlan listened mostly, offering a quiet word here and there. "You don't have to know the whole road. Just the next step." Or, "The best poems are the ones you live before you write." At one point Sophie opened the red book to a middle page and read aloud. "Some silences are wounds. Some are gardens waiting for rain. Learn the difference and water the ones that bloom." She closed it gently. "That's what we were," she said to Alex. "A garden that forgot to rain." Alex reached over and took her hand. "We're raining now." Harlan watched them, a soft ache in his chest. Not pain exactly, but the sweet sting of recognition. He remembered sitting with Emma by the river, hands almost touching, words almost spoken. He remembered how silence had felt safe then, and how much it had cost him later. The bell chimed again. Emma stepped in. She wore a light scarf against the cooler air, and her cheeks were flushed from the walk. When she saw Alex and Sophie, she paused, then smiled. "I didn't know you had company," she said. Harlan stood. "Emma, this is Alex and Sophie. They borrowed the book for a while." Emma's eyes went to the red volume on the table. "So it's been traveling." Sophie stood up quickly. We just returned it. Thank you, for whatever part you played in its story. Emma laughed. A warm surprise sound. I didn't play any part. But I'm glad it found good hands. They all sat again, Emma taking the ottoman now, Sophie moving to the floor beside Alex's chair, legs crossed. The shop felt full in a way it rarely did. For people for generations almost sharing the same small circle of light. Emma looked at Harlan. I brought something. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small framed sketch. Ink and watercolor, no bigger than a sheet of paper. It showed two figures sitting by the Mississippi at night, one playing a drum, the other painting. The river shimmered behind them, stars reflected in the water. I drew it the summer we met, she said. Kept it all these years. Thought you might like to have it here. Harlan took the frame carefully. His fingers trembled as he traced the lines. It's beautiful. Emma shrugged. It's us. Before the silence won. Sophie leaned forward. May I see? Harlan passed it around. Alex and Sophie looked at it for a long time. That's what the book feels like, Sophie said quietly. A picture of what could have been. And what still can be. Emma nodded. Exactly. They sat in companionable quiet for a while after that. No one felt the need to fill it. The silence wasn't heavy. It was shared, comfortable, like an old quilt draped over all of them. Eventually Sophie stood. We should go. But we'll come back. Often. Alex hugged Harlan, quick but firm. Thank you again. Emma rose too. I'll stay a little longer if that's all right. Harlan smiled. Always. As Alex and Sophie left, the bell chimed softly behind them. Harlan and Emma sat alone now, the framed sketch on the table between them. She reached over and took his hand. We have time now, she said. He squeezed her fingers gently. Yes, he answered. We do. Outside, the city carried on, music, footsteps, life. Inside Harlan's whispering pages, two silences had finally found their voices, and the red book waited quietly on the table, ready for whoever came next. The following week brought a gentle shift to the French Quarter. The leaves on the crepe myrtles along Frenchmen Street had started to turn the first hints of gold and crimson, and the mornings carried a cooler edge that made the chicory coffee taste even better. Harlan noticed small changes in himself too. He found himself humming old jazz tunes while dusting shelves, something he hadn't done in years. The shop felt brighter, as if the walls themselves were listening more closely. Emma had been coming by almost every afternoon. Sometimes she brought sketches, quick pencil drawings of the river, the balconies, even one of Harlan himself sitting in his rocking chair with the red book open on his lap. Other times she simply sat with him, the two of them rocking in companionable silence, occasionally sharing a memory or a laugh over something small. The way the river smelled after rain, or how the street musicians always played the same 3 songs when they thought no one was paying attention. One Thursday, just before closing, Emma arrived carrying a small cream-colored envelope. She looked nervous, something Harlan hadn't seen on her face since their youth. She waited until he'd turned the open sign to closed, and locked the door before she spoke. Thomas, she said, holding out the envelope. My daughter's wedding invitations went out yesterday. This one is for you. Harlan took it carefully. The paper was thick, textured with elegant silver lettering. Asterisk Claire and Julian request the honor of your presence at their marriage. Saturday, the 15th of November, St. Louis Cathedral. Followed by a reception at the Court of Two Sisters asterisk. Inside was a small handwritten note in Emma's familiar script. Asterisk, please come. Not just as a guest. As someone who matters. Emma asterisk. Harlan read it twice, then looked up at her. His throat felt tight. I haven't been inside St. Louis Cathedral in decades, he said quietly. Emma smiled, a little shaky. Neither have I. Not since my own wedding. But Claire wants it there. Says it feels like New Orleans. And I want you there, Thomas. Beside me, if you'll sit with me. He set the invitation down on the counter, next to the red book. For a long moment he didn't speak. The shop was so quiet they could hear the faint drip of the coffee maker in the back, and the distant wail of a saxophone warming up for the evening crowd. I'm not much for crowds anymore, he said finally. I know. She stepped closer. But it won't be a crowd to you. It'll be family, hers, mine, and maybe ours in a way. Claire already knows your name. I told her about us. About the river nights. About the silence we both carried too long. Harlan looked at the invitation again, then at Emma. Her eyes were steady, but he could see the hope flickering behind them. The same hope he'd seen 40 years ago when she'd asked him to listen to the river. I'll come, he said. Simple words, but they carried everything. Emma exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for days. She reached out and touched his arm. Thank you. They sat then in their usual chairs. The red book was between them on the table. Emma opened it to a page near the middle, one they hadn't read together before. The handwriting was different, older, more faded. Promises don't need to be loud. Sometimes the quietest ones are the strongest. Speak them once and let them live. She closed the book and looked at him. That's what this feels like, she said. A quiet promise. Not a big declaration. Just showing up. Harlan nodded. I've spent too many years not showing up. For you. For myself. Emma leaned her head back against the chair, rocking gently. We both did. But we're here now. They stayed like that until the streetlights came on outside, casting long golden stripes across the floor. Neither felt the need to fill the silence. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility. Later, when Emma stood to leave, Harlan walked her to the door. At the threshold she turned. Wear something nice, she said with a small smile. Claire's insisting on ties for the men. Harlan chuckled. I think I still have one somewhere. Probably moth-eaten. Bring the moth holes, she replied. They'll tell their own story. She stepped out into the evening. Harlan watched her walk away, scarf fluttering in the breeze, until she turned the corner toward Jackson Square. He locked the door, turned off the main lights, and left only the fairy lights glowing. Then he sat back down with the red book. He opened to a blank page near the end, one that had been waiting. In careful, deliberate handwriting he wrote, To whoever reads this next, don't wait for the storm to pass before you speak. Sometimes the storm is what finally lets the words come out. Thomas Harlan. He closed the book gently, placed it back on the table, and turned off the last light. Outside, New Orleans sang on. Music rising from the bars, laughter spilling into the street. Inside the shop, a quiet promise had been made, and the whispers felt a little louder, a little braver. November arrived in New Orleans like an old friend who'd been away too long. Cool mornings that made the steam from coffee cups rise in lazy spirals, afternoons warm enough for short sleeves, evenings that carried the faint scent of wood smoke from distant fireplaces. The city felt alive in a quieter way, as if it were holding its breath for something beautiful. The wedding day dawned clear and golden. St. Louis Cathedral stood tall in Jackson Square, its 3 white steeples cutting sharp against the sky, the bells tolling softly every quarter hour. Harlan had woken early, before the shop opened. He'd stood in front of the small mirror in his apartment for longer than he cared to admit, trying to knot a tie he hadn't worn since the 80s. The silk was navy blue, slightly faded, with tiny silver threads that caught the light. He finally got it right on the fourth try, loose, not too perfect. It felt honest. He walked the short distance to the cathedral, the red book tucked under his arm in a plain brown paper wrap. He hadn't planned to bring it, but that morning it had felt wrong to leave it behind. The streets were already filling with people in their Sunday best. Tourists pausing to take photos of the iron fences and the artists setting up easels in the square. Harlan kept his head down, but he couldn't help smiling at the familiar rhythm of the city. He arrived 20 minutes early and found a spot on the wide stone steps leading up to the entrance. The doors were open and organ music drifted out, soft, reverent, the kind that made your chest feel full. He sat on the second step, elbows on his knees, the wrapped book resting beside him. People began to arrive. Claire's friends in pastel dresses and suits, Julian's family speaking in quick French Creole bursts, a few musicians Harlan recognized from the clubs on Frenchmen Street. Then Emma appeared at the bottom of the steps. She wore a simple deep green dress that fell just below the knee, a light shawl over her shoulders, and her silver hair pinned loosely with a single pearl clip. She carried a small bouquet of white gardenias, her favorite. When she saw Harlan, her face lit up in a way that made everything around him blur for a second. "You came early," she said, climbing the steps to sit beside him. "Wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything," he replied. She glanced at the wrapped package. "What's that?" He unwrapped it slowly, revealing the red book. "Thought it should be here. It's part of the story now." Emma touched the cover gently. "It is." They sat in silence for a while, watching guests arrive. Claire appeared next, young, radiant in ivory lace, her dark hair swept up with flowers. She spotted her mother and Harlan, waved, and blew a kiss before disappearing inside with her bridesmaids. Emma leaned her shoulder against Harlan's. "She asked about you last night. Wanted to know if the man who owns the Whispering Bookstore would be sitting with me." "What did you tell her?" "That you're the reason I came back to New Orleans with an open heart instead of a closed one." Harlan looked at her. "Emma." She shook her head. "Don't. Not yet. Just sit with me. That's enough for now." The bells tolled 11. The music swelled. Guests filed in. Harlan and Emma stood, brushed the dust from their clothes, and walked inside together. The cathedral was cool and dim, lit by tall candles and the soft glow of stained glass. The pews were filling quickly. Emma led Harlan to a seat near the front on the bride's side. As they sat, she slipped her hand into his. He didn't pull away. Their fingers laced together naturally, like they'd never stopped. The ceremony began. Claire walked down the aisle on her stepfather's arm. Emma's second husband had passed years earlier, and Claire had asked her uncle to give her away. But when she reached the altar, she looked straight at Harlan and Emma, smiled, and mouthed two silent words. "Thank you." The vows were simple, heartfelt. Julian's voice cracked once. Claire laughed through tears. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," the church erupted in quiet applause. Afterward, everyone spilled out onto the steps for photos. Harlan and Emma lingered near the side, letting the younger crowd take center stage. Claire found them eventually, still in her gown, veil trailing behind her like a cloud. "You're the bookstore man," she said to Harlan, hugging him without hesitation. "Mom talks about you like you hung the moon." Harlan chuckled. "Your mom exaggerates." Claire looked at the red book in his hand. "Is that the famous one?" Emma answered. "It is. It's been traveling." Claire touched the cover. "May I?" Harlan handed it to her. She opened it carefully, flipped through a few pages, and stopped on Alex's note. Then on Harlan's own words from the other night. She read aloud softly. "Don't wait for the storm to pass before you speak. Sometimes the storm is what finally lets the words come out. Claire looked up, eyes shining. That's beautiful. Whoever wrote that, they knew. Harlan glanced at Emma. I think we all did, eventually. Claire hugged them both again. Thank you for being here. Both of you. It means more than you know. She hurried back to her husband and the photographers. Emma and Harlan stepped to the edge of the steps, away from the crowd. The sun was high now, warm on their faces. She leaned against the stone railing. Thomas, she said, I don't know what happens next. But I know I don't want to spend the rest of my days wondering. He turned to face her. Neither do I. She took a breath. Then let's not wonder. Let's just be. Together. Quietly if that's what we need. Or not so quietly. Whatever it is, let's do it together. Harlan looked at her, really looked. The woman who'd once painted the river, who'd once loved him enough to leave when he couldn't speak, who'd come back when the silence finally broke. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. The old drumstick he carved their initials into all those years ago. The wood was worn smooth from years of being carried. I kept this, he said. Thought maybe one day I'd need to remember how to make noise again. Emma took it, ran her thumb over the faded T+E. We both did, she whispered. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him. They stood like that as the wedding party laughed and posed below, as the bells rang again, as New Orleans kept moving around them. No grand declaration. No dramatic kiss in the rain. Just two people, finally choosing to speak the quietest vow of all. We're here. And we're staying. The red book rested between them on the step, open to a blank page, waiting as always, for the next whisper. Winter settled over New Orleans like a soft blanket. Never harsh, but enough to make the mornings sharper and the evenings longer. The crepe myrtles along Frenchmen Street had lost most of their leaves, leaving bare branches that traced delicate patterns against the pale sky. Inside Harlan's whispering pages, the fairy lights stayed on all day now. The shop felt warmer, more intimate, as if it had drawn in closer around its two regular occupants. Harlan and Emma had fallen into a gentle routine. She came most afternoons, sometimes with a new sketch, sometimes with nothing but herself. They'd sit in the rocking chairs, share coffee, talk about small things, the price of gardenias at the market, a new musician who'd started playing on the corner, the way the river looked different every season. Other times they simply read side by side, the red book always within reach on the table between them, its cover now worn a little smoother from so many hands. One gray Tuesday in mid-December, the bell chimed just after 3 o'clock. A girl stepped inside, 14, maybe 15. Tall for her age, skinny, with long dark braids and large brown eyes that darted around the shop like she was afraid of being noticed. She wore a faded denim jacket over a school uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder. She paused just inside the door, hands twisting the strap, looking like she might bolt at any second. Harlan glanced up from the counter where he was sorting a stack of old postcards. Emma, sitting nearby with a cup of tea, noticed her too and offered a small, welcoming smile. The girl took one hesitant step forward. "Hi," she said. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the hum of the heater. Is this place open to just sit?" Harlan set the postcards down. "Always open for sitting. No purchase required." She nodded, relieved, and moved toward the second rocking chair, the one that had become Emma's spot. She sat on the very edge, backpack still on, knees pressed together. Emma leaned forward slightly. "I'm Emma. This is Thomas, Mr. Harlan to most folks." The girl gave a tiny wave. "I'm Maya. Maya Torres." "Nice to meet you, Maya," Harlan said gently. "Cold out there today?" "Yeah." She looked at the floor. I didn't want to go home right after school. My mom's working late again and my little brother's at daycare, so it's just quiet. Too quiet sometimes. Harlan and Emma exchanged a glance, both recognizing that particular kind of quiet. Maya's eyes landed on the red book. That's a pretty cover. It is, Harlan said. It's been here a long time. Seen a lot of readers. Maya hesitated. Does it have stories in it? Like handwritten ones? Emma smiled. It does. People leave notes. Whispers, really. Things they needed to say, or things they needed to hear. Maya bit her lip. Can I look? Harlan slid the book across the table. Take your time. Maya opened it slowly, as if afraid the pages might crumble. She flipped gently, stopping every few pages to read a note. Her expression changed with each one. Curious, then thoughtful, then something softer, almost sad. She paused on Alex's note. Read it silently. Then Harlan's. Then the older ones, the faded pencil from 1927, the ink from the 1950s, the ballpoint from the 1980s. After a while she looked up. Her eyes were shiny. People, they were scared too? She asked. Most of them, Emma answered quietly. Scared of saying the wrong thing. Scared of being alone. Scared of being heard and still not understood. Maya nodded slowly. My mom says I'm too quiet. That I should speak up more in class. But when I try, the words just stick. Like they're stuck in my throat. Harlan leaned forward. Words don't always have to come out loud right away. Sometimes they start as whispers. Even to yourself. Maya looked at the blank page at the end, the one Harlan had left open after writing his own note. I don't know what to write, she said. You don't have to write anything today, Emma said. Or ever if you don't want to. But if you do, write what you wish someone had told you when the quiet felt too big. Maya stared at the page for a long time. Then she reached into her backpack, pulled out a pencil, and after another long pause, wrote 4 simple lines. To whoever feels too quiet. Your silence isn't empty. It's full of things waiting for the right moment. When it comes, speak. Even if your voice shakes. Maya. She closed the book carefully and pushed it back toward Harlan. I think I should go home now, she said. Before it gets dark. Harlan stood. You're welcome back anytime, Maya. Doors always open. She gave a small smile, the first real one since she'd walked in. Thanks. For letting me sit. And for the book. Emma walked her to the door. Take care of yourself, sweetheart. Maya nodded, stepped out into the gray afternoon, and disappeared down the street. Harlan and Emma returned to their chairs. The shop felt different now. Still quiet but richer, as if one more layer had been added to its history. Emma opened the book to Maya's note and read it aloud. Harlan listened, then said softly, She'll be all right. Emma closed the book. She will. Because someone listened. They sat in silence after that. Not the old heavy kind, but the good kind. The kind that holds everything without needing to explain. Outside, the first few snowflakes of the season drifted past the window. Rare for New Orleans but not impossible. They melted almost as soon as they touched the ground, but for a moment, the street shimmered white. Inside the shop, the red book rested quietly, its pages a little fuller, its whispers a little stronger, waiting for the next person brave enough to listen. Christmas lights had begun to appear along Frenchmen Street. Strings of warm white bulbs draped over balconies, small trees glowing in shop windows, the faint scent of cinnamon and pine drifting from open doors. New Orleans never went full winter wonderland, but it tried in its own way. Poinsettias and iron planters, carolers on street corners singing in Creole and English, the river reflecting holiday lights like scattered stars. Inside Harlan's whispering pages, the fairy lights now had company. A small real Christmas tree Harlan and Emma had set up in the corner the week before. No bigger than a child, decorated with mismatched ornaments from both their pasts. Tiny glass drums, watercolor painted stars, a faded angel Emma had made as a girl. The tree's lights twinkled softly, casting gentle patterns across the shelves. Harlan had taken to closing the shop early on Sundays so he and Emma could sit together longer. On this particular Sunday, just before dusk, the bell chimed one last time. An older man stepped in, 75, perhaps 80, thin, slightly stooped, wearing a wool overcoat that had seen better decades. His hair was sparse and white, his eyes sharp behind thick glasses. He carried a walking stick with a carved handle shaped like a riverboat. He paused just inside, taking in the shop with slow, deliberate sweeps of his gaze. Harlan looked up from the counter. Emma, who had been arranging a small display of poetry books, turned as well. The man removed his hat, a battered fedora, and held it against his chest. "Evening," he said. His voice was low, gravelly, with the unmistakable cadence of someone born and raised in the city. "Name's Elias. Elias Grant. I used to come here, a long time ago." Harlan stood. "Welcome back, Elias. Pull up a chair. Coffee's hot." Elias hesitated, then moved forward. He lowered himself into the second rocking chair with careful movements, leaning his stick against the armrest. "I wasn't sure this place was still standing," he said. "Thought maybe the years took it like they took everything else." Harlan poured a mug and handed it over. "Still here. Still whispering." Elias took the coffee, wrapped both hands around it, and looked at the red book on the table. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion but in recognition. "That's her," he said quietly. "Elizabeth's book." Emma leaned forward. "Elizabeth." "My wife," Elias answered. "Elizabeth White. She owned this shop before you, Thomas. Back in the 20s and 30s. She called it Whispers in Pages then. Said books weren't just for reading. They were for listening." Harlan sat down opposite him. "We found her note. The first one. 1927. Elias nodded slowly. "She wrote it after our daughter passed. Little Marie. Scarlet fever took her in 3 days. Elizabeth, she stopped talking for months. Just sat in the back room with that book. Wrote in it when the words wouldn't come out loud. Said it was the only way she could keep breathing." Emma's hand went to her mouth. Harlan reached over and touched her arm gently. "I didn't know," Harlan said. "I'm sorry." Elias waved it off, not dismissively, but with the weariness of someone who'd carried the sorrow so long it had become part of him. "No need. It was a long time ago. But she never let the book go. Kept adding to it. When she passed in 58, I thought it was lost in the flood. Hurricane Betsy took half our things. I never looked for it after that. Figured it was gone with everything else." He looked at Harlan. "How'd it find its way back here?" Harlan told him the dusty cabinet, the notes from strangers, Alex, Maya, the quiet people who'd borrowed it and left something behind. Elias listened without interrupting. When Harlan finished, the old man reached out and touched the cover, fingers trembling just a little. "She'd be proud," he said. "She always said the book wasn't hers. It belonged to whoever needed it next." Emma opened it to the first handwritten note, the one from 1927, and read it aloud. "Silence isn't the end. It's the space where healing begins. Fill it slowly." Elias closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his cheek. "That was the first thing she wrote after Marie," he whispered. "I found her crying over the page one night. She said, 'Elias, if I don't write it down, it'll stay inside forever.'" He opened his eyes and looked at them both. "I came today because I've been quiet too long myself. My second wife passed last year. Cancer. Slow. I've been sitting in an empty house, not talking to anyone. Then I walked past this street yesterday. Saw the sign. Thought maybe there's still something left to say. Harlan leaned forward. There always is. Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, yellowed, creased from years of carrying. This was hers, he said. She wrote it the week before she died. I never read it. Couldn't. But I brought it today. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting matched the first note in the book. Elias read aloud, voice cracking only once. To whoever finds this after I'm gone, don't be afraid of the quiet. It's not empty, it's waiting. Fill it with love, even if it's just a whisper, even if it shakes, even if it's only to yourself. That's how healing happens. That's how we keep living. Elizabeth. The shop was completely silent after he finished. Even the street outside seemed to hush. Elias folded the paper again and slipped it into the front of the red book, tucking it beside the title page. I think she'd want it here, he said. With the others. Harlan nodded. It belongs here. Elias stood slowly, leaning on his stick. I should go. But thank you. For keeping it safe. For letting it speak. Emma stood too. You're welcome back anytime, Elias. For coffee. For quiet. For anything. He smiled, a small tired smile but real. Maybe I will. He walked to the door, paused, then turned back. Merry Christmas, he said softly. Merry Christmas. Harlan and Emma answered together. The bell chimed as he left. They watched him disappear into the twilight, walking slowly but steadily down Frenchmen Street. Harlan and Emma sat back down. The tree lights twinkled. The red book lay open, Elizabeth's note now part of its history. Emma rested her head on Harlan's shoulder. Full circle, she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. Maybe that's what whispers do. They keep coming back until we finally hear them. Outside, the first real snowflakes of the season began to fall, soft, silent, perfect. They melted on the warm pavement almost immediately, but for a few magical minutes Frenchmen Street shimmered white. Inside the shop, the last blank page waited. No longer blank, but ready for whatever whisper came next. Christmas Eve arrived in New Orleans with a gentle hush. The streets of the French Quarter were quieter than usual. Most tourists had gone home, and the locals were tucked away with family or friends. A light fog rolled in from the river, softening the edges of the gas lamps and making the holiday lights glow like distant stars. Inside Harlan's whispering pages, the small tree twinkled steadily, its ornaments catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the shelves. Harlan had closed the shop at noon. There would be no customers today. The sign read, "Closed for family," in his careful handwriting. He and Emma had spent the afternoon rearranging the back room, a tiny space he'd rarely used, into something warmer. They'd pushed the shelves aside, brought in 2 extra chairs from upstairs, set a small table with a cloth, and lit candles that smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine. The red book rested in the center of the table, its cover now familiar and worn in all the right places. At 6 o'clock the bell chimed softly. Alex and Sophie were the first to arrive. Alex carried a bottle of bourbon. "For toasting," he said with a grin, and Sophie held a tray of homemade beignets dusted with powdered sugar. They looked younger somehow, lighter, as if the months since their reunion had smoothed away the last rough edges. "Merry Christmas, Thomas." "Emma," Sophie said, hugging them both. "We brought dessert. And company." Behind them came Maya, still tall and a little awkward in her teenage way, but her braids were tied with red ribbon, and she carried a small wrapped gift. I hope it's okay I came," she said shyly. "Mom said it was fine. She's working tonight, but she told me to tell you thank you." Harlan smiled. "It's more than okay, Maya. Pull up a chair." Elias arrived last. He moved slower these days, leaning more heavily on his stick, but his eyes were bright. He carried a small tin box, old dented, the kind that once held tea. "Couldn't stay away," he said, tipping his hat to Emma. "Figured this book started with my Elizabeth. Ought to end the year with her too." They all settled in a loose circle around the table. Harlan poured coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for Maya. Sophie passed around the beignet. The room filled with quiet sounds. The soft clink of mugs, the rustle of napkins, the occasional laugh. Emma opened the conversation. "I thought tonight we could do something simple," she said. "Read a few of the whispers aloud. The ones that mean something to us. No pressure. Just sharing." Alex went first. He opened to his own note and read it again. His handwriting still fresh and bold. "Silence can be love, but speaking it is braver. I'm crossing the bridge. Alex." He looked at Sophie. "I still mean it. Every day." Sophie smiled and squeezed his hand. Maya went next. She read her own words, her voice steadier now. "Your silence isn't empty. It's full of things waiting for the right moment. When it comes, speak, even if your voice shakes." "Maya." She looked around the circle. "I talked to my mom last week. Really talked. About school. About feeling alone. She listened. It wasn't perfect, but it was something." Elias cleared his throat. He opened to Elizabeth's note, the one he'd added, and read it slowly. "Don't be afraid of the quiet. It's not empty, it's waiting. Fill it with love, even if it's just a whisper. Even if it shakes. Even if it's only to yourself. That's how healing happens. That's how we keep living. Elizabeth." His voice broke on the last line. He closed the book and placed his hand flat on the cover. "She'd be happy to see this," he said. "All of us here. Keeping her words alive." Harlan looked at Emma. She nodded. He opened to his own note, the one he'd written the night he promised to show up. "Don't wait for the storm to pass before you speak. Sometimes the storm is what finally lets the words come out. Thomas Harlan." He paused, then added quietly, "And sometimes the storm brings someone back." Emma reached over and took his hand. She didn't read anything aloud. She didn't need to. The way she looked at him said everything. They sat like that for a while. 6 people, different ages, different stories, bound by the same small book and the same quiet courage. Finally, Maya spoke up. "Is there a last page? Like for everyone?" Harlan smiled. "There's always room for one more." He slid the book toward the center. Emma handed Maya the pen. One by one they added a final line, not a long note, just a sentence each. "Alex, keep crossing bridges. They lead home." Sophie, "Love whispers loudest when it's shared." Maya, "Your voice matters, even when it shakes." Elias, "The quiet ones carry the strongest echoes." Emma, "Listen, then speak, then listen again." Harlan went last. He wrote slowly, carefully. "The whispers never end. They just find new voices." Thomas and Emma. He closed the book one final time. Outside, the fog thickened, muffling the distant sounds of carols and laughter. Inside, the candles burned low, the tree lights glowed, and the small circle of people sat together in perfect, peaceful quiet. No one felt the need to say more. The red book rested on the table, full now, not with noise, but with voices that had finally found their way out. And in that quiet shop on Frenchmen Street, on a Christmas Eve in New Orleans, the whispers of life settled at last, not silenced but heard.